we love stories like that, not just our spiritual stories, but our culture is littered with these stories, right? That Disney is remaking old classics, right? So they've remade Sleeping Beauty, right? So who's the new Sleeping Beauty? Does anybody know? They're remaking this movie?
She's good looking.
All right, she's good looking. Oh, that's good looking. So, I mean, just know if you want to go see it, she's good looking.
Beauty and the Beast is Hermione.
Yep, and then they're making Sleeping Beauty, and I just saw this Beauty and the Beast, and saw them remaking that. The trailer to that looks awesome, right? Well, what's so attractive about those movies? You have a princess or a Sleeping Beauty that has fallen asleep under a spell that a prince comes and saves and rescues her. That she's woken up by a kiss, right? Beauty and the Beast, you have a pretty woman that has been captured by a beast and is holding her hostage, but that through her love and pursuing of him has awakened a prince or a handsome man within her that she, in a sense, because of her love, has unveiled him to his fullest potential, in a sense. One of my favorite stories, and it's definitely written by a Christian man, is the Chronicles of Narnia. So many of you know this and the thread of this. And one of my favorite books of the Chronicles of Narnia is The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Has anybody read that book in here? Yes. So you guys will know that at the end of the book, when Aslan, who plays the Jesus figure, comes in and he's rescuing all these stone statues that the witch has turned into stone. So if you haven't, there's this lion that represents Aslan. These children come into this world that has been overtaken by the white witch, right? And she's turned the landscape into winter permanently. And then as she captures these animals and different people in the story, she turns them into stone and keeps them in her castle. And so when Aslan comes in and he rescues these stones, he begins to do a mighty work. And so I began reading this, and I was reading this recently, and it was a crazy story, but see if this doesn't sound like your and I's story a little bit. So follow along with me as I read this, or at least hear me. So, for a second, after Aslan had breathed upon him, the stone lion, just looked the same. Then a tiny streak of gold began to run along his white marble back, and then it began to spread. And the color seemed to lick. Then the color seemed to lick all over him, as the flame licks over a bit of paper. Then, while his hindquarters were still obviously stone, the lion shook his mane, all the heavy stone, and the folds began to ripple into living hair. Then he opened his great red mouth, warm and living, and gave a prodigious yawn, and now his hind legs began to come to life. And he had lifted one of them and scratched himself. Then, having caught sight of Aslan, he went bounding after him, frisking around and whimpering with delight, and jumping up to lick his face. Of course the children's eyes turned to follow the lion, but the sight they saw was so wonderful they soon forgot about him. Everywhere, statues were coming to life. The courtyard looked no longer like a museum. It began to look more like a zoo. Creatures were running after Aslan and dancing around him until he was almost hidden in the crowd. And is that not a picture of this room? We were all stone. Now you're a zoo. Has not Jesus sought you like that? And that's the idea of awaken. And so when we talk about this idea of awaken, we're talking about the fact that not only has Jesus awakened you, but he's awakened you to something. So read with me real quick. Well, actually, before I go there, I'll stay here. Is that Jesus has awakened you from your slumber. So that's the first bullet point if you're taking notes. But here's how I think we could do this: is we could say that Jesus has awakened you from your slumber. That Jesus took our lifeless, dead body, soul, mind, and breathed life into it and made life and vibrance and color and joy. That he took nothing and made something. That when I was dead in my slumber and kept trying to live, it felt like a dream. I don't know if you know what I mean, but you know how you have dreams, and when you have dreams, in your dreams, sometimes you do very irrational things, but it makes sense in your dream, right? I had a dream one time where I was running around and I could fly, but I could only fly like 3 inches off the ground. But it made sense to me. And then I woke up and I was like, what in the world? Like, why in the world in my mind did I think that was cool? And then second is, what made me even cause to think I could do that? But if we trace the way we were before God met us, wasn't that our rationale a lot of times? Why in the world did I think the world operated that way? How could I in the world think that this was actually going to satisfy me? How can I make this my identity and my weight up and put the weight of my soul into this when I know this is not the way the world works? And so when God awakens you from your slumber, like he did with the statues, you begin to see the world for what it really is. That you actually begin to see and be awakened to reality. And so that's the second point, if you're taking notes still, is that not only have you been awakened from your slumber, but you've been awakened to reality. And so here's where we're going to dig in tonight. Is because here's what we're tempted to think, especially on a project like this. Is this is a summer project, or this is my new life in Christ, as if to say that I've been awakened to some fantasy land, that the real world, or what I once was giving my life to, was the real world, and now I'm just kind of living a separate life in some fantasy land. Meaning, I think the way we often talk about the Christian life as if it's not actually reality. That hopefully the structure of project and the way we're encouraging you to pursue God is reality. That it is opening your eyes to the way the world should work, just to put it in another way. That this is not just some set-aside group of people living in some fantasy land, but this is a group of people that want to have their eyes open more and more to reality, to the person and work of Jesus, to the world that he's actually made and the way it should run. That's what we've been awakened to. That's the hope in pursuing it. But you and I know that even though we've been awakened to reality, we often want to go back to a dream. We feel it. You can feel the pull, like we do a lot of times when we have a dream that we love or that we enjoy, and we wake up right before the good part happens, right? What do we try to do? Go back to sleep. It never works, does it? That is what the enemy and our flesh and the world try to do with us, is that we are awakened to the person of God, begin to walk with him, and we feel like, that dream, even because I'm further along away from it, it seems really good, and so I want to try to pretend like I can go back to sleep. But you can't. You know reality, right? You know the way the world works. You know that when you try to live under the illusion of a dream, that it is in itself just a dream or a fantasy. That one day you're going to wake up. And so tonight, what I want to do is I want to ask the question is, what would the Bible have to say? How are we actually not just awakened to reality, but how do we live? How are we awakened, and how do we continue to live in light of reality? How are we awakened over and over and over again to the person and the work of Jesus? And so tonight we're going to be talking about what this looks like in our life. And so this is where our verse kicks in. And so if you have your Bibles, flip with me to Psalm 17, verse 15. So here's what it says. As for me, I shall behold your face in righteousness. And when I wake, I shall be satisfied with your likeness. I'll read it again. As for me, I shall behold your face in righteousness, and when I awake, I shall be satisfied with your likeness. So what's happening here? It's an amazing verse. But the context of this verse is very interesting, actually. It's written by David, who many of you know the famous story of David and Goliath, who David actually ends up becoming a king. But I don't know if many of you know that in the process of actually becoming king, people sought to kill him. And even later in his life, people sought to kill him, his own children. So David, in many of the instances in Psalms, is just writing a lament of people wanting to take his life, of wanting to strip him of things that God has promised him, and wanting to do harm to him, and him under crazy circumstances being put in caves and hiding out in caves and all sorts of stuff. And so here is one of those instances that when you look at Psalm 17, it really, for the most part, is a psalm of lament and frustration and sadness, kind of crying out to God that these people are wanting to kill me, God. That you promised me all these things, but these people are wanting to kill me. And so the crazy thing, if you look at verse 14, the one before that, he begins to talk about the people who are trying to kill him and what they look like. And so he begins to say, listen, God, these people are trying to kill me, and the portion of their life, the portion is from men of the world whose portion is in this life. Here's what he means. Listen, God, I'm following you, and these people are pursuing me, and it's looking like the people that are pursuing me have everything. That if you were to look at their life, the portion of their life, it seems like they got it all together. It's like the people on campus that when you begin to walk with God and you're following him and you're like, God, why are you asking me to give this up? This relationship, this person, whatever it is that you're asking me to give this. But it's looking like all the people that are completely opposing you are getting everything and anything they want. And it seems like their life is full. That's what he's saying. And then he goes on to say, listen, you fill their womb with treasure. They are satisfied with children. And so in that day, children were much looked at as a blessing. That God opening the womb of children for children and God blessing children of people was evidence that God was behind them and God blessing them, or seemingly. That them having children was just a wonderful gift from the Lord. And so when David sees them, like, he's not just saying, man, they got everything. He's saying, God, it seems like you just keep blessing them over and over and over again in big ways by giving them children. And then lastly, he says this. Look at this. This is crazy. He says, and they leave their abundance to their infants. So not only do they have a ton, are they getting what everyone wanted in that day almost, they have enough in excess that they're passing it on to generations. So here you have David, maybe crawling out in a cave, posted up, probably cold, looking at all these people and saying, God, here's all this happening, and then bam, we get verse 15. It is so sweet, because here's what he says. Look at how he starts it. As for me, I shall behold your face in righteousness. And so, David is seeing their face, and here's what he's saying. He's seeing all these circumstances, and he's saying, listen, God, the circumstances suck. But as for me, I know reality. I can't turn away. That when I'm awakened to the person in the face of God, circumstances don't determine reality for me anymore. That there's something greater that actually determines my affections and my desires and the trajectory of my life. God, it's seemingly like you're doing all this. But as for me, I know reality. I met you. I know your voice. I know your gaze. I know your character. So even though circumstances and circumstantially everything looks like it's going to go up, as for me, I'm choosing to believe. As for me, I'm going back to your promise. I can't turn away from you. You see David here in the midst is looking forward to something. What he's saying is listen, I know Christ, that circumstances can't play a bearing on me. And so what David actually then does is he begins to walk through three things in which happen when he is awakened to God. So I'll say that again. That David is not just saying, God, for me, I know that you're true and your reality to me, that I personally met you. He actually begins to walk through his own personal story, or what happens when you are awakened to God. And so tonight, what I want to do briefly is just camp out and say, okay, what does David say happens when you're awakened to God? So that when we, this summer, or maybe back on campus, or even for the rest of our life, we can say, okay, God, circumstantially things are happening. But as for me, I know it's true. I know it's reality. And so what are those three things he says? So look at the first one. He says this. As for me, I shall behold your face in righteousness. And so here's what he's saying. He's saying that I've been awakened to behold. God, you've awakened me to behold. To behold what? His face. And so he says, since I sense the face of God, I've been awakened to it. Another way to put it is that the character and the person of God moves from being abstract to intimate. It is being awakened to God, he's saying, is where your head and your heart meet. Is where your rationale and your affections come together and collide. It's where your imagination is captured, is what he's saying. This is what the whole idea of beholding or being awakened is. And you know what this is like. It's where your rationale, that you begin to hear things like Brad was saying, that people are going to share the gospel with you and begin to make sense of the world to you, and God begins to show you things, and you're like, it's making sense. Like, I never would have seen the world this way. I was always wondering why the world felt incomplete, or my purpose felt empty, or I always felt not satisfied, but now I'm seeing things clearly. And my rationale is making sense, that I'm seeing that this is not just a feelings thing, but this is actually an objective, true thing. That there's a risen Jesus, that there's a God who lives, that this world is governed by someone else. That my head is actually being engaged, but not only my head, my heart. Because then what happens is you begin to see yourself. You begin to say, if there's a God who runs and orchestrates and creates the world, I know that I've rebelled against him. That I've over and over and over again forfeited his love. But then you see the gospel, and your affections are kindled. Your heart is captured. And so the awakened to behold is where your head and your heart meet and they collide, and then God begins to capture your imagination. There's a God like this? There's a God that would love me in my mess, that knows me fully, but yes, loves me completely, that knows what I did last night and knows my thoughts. John in 1 John 3:1 has a crazy statement. I'm not going to read the whole verse, but it's kind of at the end, or kind of at the end of a train of thought, and then he says this. He says, see what kind of love the Father has given to us. And so he says, he's talking about everything that happens, and then he kind of explodes with this thought and says, look, see what kind of love the Father has given to us. And here's what kind of happens there. The actual translation there would be more similar to this. It would be more like, from what world does this love come from? It's kind of like when you'll meet the Comic-Con people in a couple of months, like a month. And you're like, bro, what world are you from? You're like, why would you spend hours doing this? And if any of I'm a comic book movie fan, and so I'm not ragging on that, but if you're spending thousands of dollars on it, maybe I'm ragging on it. But what John is getting at is that idea, is that this love or this God that has awakened me, where did this come from? How is this true? This is too wonderful. That when we're awakened to this God, what happens is that He begins to dictate what is most important about us, what really matters. That He begins to determine what we think about. That when we're awakened to this person of Christ, He begins to capture our daydreams. We can't help it. I mean, you know what it's like when someone captures your imagination or your thoughts. You can't get them out of your head. And so when David says, "As for me, I will behold your face in righteousness," this is what he's getting at. And I've been awakened to behold. God has done something in me. And not only that, has He captured that, what happens after that is he says this, "And then when I awake, I shall be satisfied with your likeness." So he's getting into this. He's saying, then after I'm awakened, I begin to participate in His likeness. Or to put it another way, is that you become what you behold. You become what you behold. You know this, right? The mall is a perfect example of why this is true. So what happens when you go into the mall? You, if you're like I was, a pimply-faced teenager who's very insecure and loved Abercrombie and Fitch. But what would happen is I would walk up to these stores, or you would walk through, and the mall tells you all sorts of stories, right? You see the weird guys standing outside of Hollister and Abercrombie with their shirts off, and they looked jacked, and you're like, if you're like me, you're like, I want to be like that. And so you think in your head, because of those pictures, okay, there's a lack in me, I'm missing something, so what I need is that. I need that shirt, I need that outfit, I need this, and if I get this, then I'll become like this. Does that make sense? That our culture has identified this story all too well. They know that in everybody there's this deep void of lack. We know we're incomplete. We know there's something wrong. They're telling the story. They're offering the solution. And what happens is we buy into it. We're awakened. I'm awakened to this this clothing line, thinking that I'm going to become like this. Are you still following me? But what happens when you get it? You always got to go back, because it really doesn't happen, right? It really doesn't change you. You're the same, I'm the same, discontent, empty person. But it's not only the mall, it's all spheres of life. Universities do this. The American dream is essentially this. And so what David is saying here is he's saying, listen, when you're awakened to God, you begin to actually participate in His likeness. Meaning, it's not an empty promise. That when you begin to meet and interact with this God, what happens is the love of God moves from becoming a bumper sticker to actually becoming tangible, to becoming real, becoming something that you can feel and sense, and not just in a mystical way, but in an actual, tangible, real way. That the holiness of God that was once distant and kind of weird actually becomes terrifyingly beautiful, because it exposes our inadequacies, but like David, it satisfies us because we begin to see that there was a Holy One that came for us. And what happens when we begin to be awakened to the person of God is that He begins to awaken these things with us. That the fruit of the Spirit begin to become real in our life. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, self-control, gentleness. And I begin to participate, or to put it another way, become like God who I am beholding. It's not an empty promise. God's not just saying at the other end, listen, I've identified your problem. You're empty. Here's another empty promise. He's saying, no, listen. I'm going to actually let you participate in who I am. You're going to become like you should be. You're going to be like the person I made you to be. And we're like this all the time. I mean, I was a little boy and loved athletes. So like I was telling you the other night, I wanted to be like Michael Jordan. So what did I do? Wore his jersey. Enjoyed my Allen Iverson a ton. What did I do? Practice my crossover like him in the mirror over and over again, even though it wasn't anything like him. I have a good friend in this room who loves Star Wars, The Phantom Menace, and after seeing it, actually tried to grow a rat tail. Bought one. His name is Dylan. That's why he's single, everybody. No, but I'm playing. That's actually a true story. But here's why I share that, and even to sum this up, is that it is in the very fabric of who you are to become what you behold. That's what I want you to know. That you can't get away from it. That David is saying is, listen, you're going to become like in what you behold. And then he ends with this. Look at how he ends it. He says this. And when I awake, I shall be satisfied with your likeness. It's indicative of what Jesus was saying in John 15:11 when he said this. These things I have spoken to you, that my joy may be in you, and that your joy may be full. And so here's what you need to realize when we start using terms in our testimony and start throwing around terms when we're sharing the gospel with people, that it's not that Jesus just gave you joy or gave you purpose or Jesus completed your life. That in itself would be wonderful, but it's that the joy of Jesus himself is in you. That is crazy. That Jesus, his joy, is now in you. It's not just some joy, it's his joy. And that is why it's complete. That is why you and I both know that when we're awakened to him, like David, we're satisfied. I don't need to go anywhere. I really don't. Because I know who this God is. Yes, they seem like they have it all together. They seem like God is blessing their life over and over and over again. They seem like they're the ones being cared for. But I know, as for me, I know it's true. Because I've been satisfied. I have the joy of Jesus within me. That is complete. David here is telling this story. He's saying that my soul kept longing and searching for things, but I've stopped. And so he's saying that when I've been awakened to this person of God, I've been awakened to his story and moving through the world. And so it's interesting, right? When we see movies like Sleeping Beauty and the Beauty and the Beast and The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, that when we watch those, you and I know it feels like there's a deeper kind of sense of like, I mean, this is beautiful. This is a wonderful story, right? But why is it a wonderful story? It's because it's true. There's a deeper truth in it that you and I know, that David's talking about in his stories. He's saying, listen, there isn't just a prince that conquered dragons to come save you. There's a king who conquered the devil, the grave, and the world for you. That didn't just go in at the cost, didn't just go at the risk of his life and to save you and transform you. He went in at the cost of his life to save you and pursue you. That's why Beauty and the Beast is so wonderful, is there was always a brink of death with her. And he didn't just go in at the risk of his life. He went at the cost of his life. And what happens to us? we're made into something beautiful. That we are changed and we're awakened, and God begins to work in us what was always once there, what was dead. That Jesus, and that we just don't have a lion that breathes life into statues. We have a king who breathes life into dead bones. People that were hostile in nature to him. And so when we see these stories, it's no wonder that when we have this idea of awaken, and I don't know what your thoughts of it are, it stirs within us a deep sense of like, I want to be a part of something like that. And I want to know something like that. This is reality. And so here, let me tell you what David's actually, in context, actually the full story that he's talking about here. He's not just talking about the fact that I've been awakened now to the person of God. David is actually also referring to one day he's going to awaken fully to the person of God. And it's like what Isaiah says. If you look at Isaiah, he talks about the sting and the overcoming of death. And David is saying, listen, I know death is coming for all of us, but I know that one day I'm going to be awakened. Not partially to his face, but fully to his face. That I know my king is coming, and I will not just be partially or have this wrestle of satisfaction within me. I'll have full and complete satisfaction within me. That David is referring to a future reality that I know in the moment circumstances seem like everything else is true. But as for me, I know the story. I know he's coming. I know what is true. And so what happens as you read here, if you know that is a future reality, is going to invade your present situation. If you know your future is an inheritance and a joy with Jesus, it's going to invade your presence now. If I'm going to have a satisfaction that is going to reach to the recesses and depths of my heart in the future, why would I not want it to invade partially now? If I'm going to be face to face before this God who loves me completely, one day, why would I want to not seek to do it over and over and over and over and over again now? So here's why I get excited about the summer for you guys. It's because I can ask the question, to what lengths will you go to go before the face of God this summer? What lengths will you go to sit before his face? Here's the tendency with projects that I've noticed. Is we treat them a lot like we did when we first came into Denver, right? I've ridden in cars with a lot of y'all, so I know this. So I'm calling you out right now. But what happens when you first see the mountains? We begin to pull out our phone and just Instagram. Boom, 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 right? I want to take pictures of this because I want people to see it back in, the cornfields of Illinois and see what I'm seeing, right? Or in Ohio. In Indiana, people are like, oh, that's okay. It's already beautiful here. But it's the same. It really is. Indiana's lame. But the Midwest in general. When you see something this beautiful, you begin to take pictures of it. But a project can be a lot like a picture versus reality. Because even though you've seen pictures of the Rockies before, right? What happened when you actually saw it? It took your breath away, I imagine. There are mountains like this. They have snow on them, right? In May, people can treat project a lot like this. Your trainings are a mere picture. They're not bad. They're actually wonderful. They show you where you should go. They help give you structure of what it could be like. But reality in the sense of you personally coming before the face of God. You individually, us corporately together, but you also individually coming and taking lengths to go sit before his face. So what lengths will you go? What will it look like? Will it cost sleep? Will it cost letting go of things that have captured our heart for so long? What will it look like for you to behold the face of God this summer? To be awakened to Him. So here's what I'm going to do, is I'm going to pray for us, and then we're going to take 2 minutes or so, and I just want you to write down one thought. So as you were hearing this tonight, what was God doing within you? Maybe what's one thought that you can take away and say, okay, here's what I think is going to mean for me to behold the face of God this summer. Here's the one thing I want to take away. It doesn't mean that you don't think of anything else. But just so I know when I can go back to my discipleship groups, I can have this, and here's what I think God was telling me in this. Sorry. And so let me pray for us, and then I'll let you guys do that. So Father, we are so thankful, God, that you have awakened us. Father, we're so thankful that we are ill-deserving, and God, that we didn't seek you first, but you sought us. And Jesus, we're so thankful that you are our King, that didn't just conquer dragons, but conquered the sin, the death, and the grave for us. And so, Jesus, I pray that you would grip our hearts tonight. And God, even as we come to you now in worship, God, would you meet us? Would you let us hear from you? God, would you let us sit before your face tonight? So, Father, I pray this in your name for your glory. All right, take the next few minutes and go ahead and do that.